Okay, so the future, right? And
Okay.
everyone thinks about it, like flying cars, robot butlers, all that jazz. But like, for real, the future's already being built, you know?
Okay.
It's happening right now.
Yeah, and it's wild how much has changed, like just in the last few years. The 2020s, I mean, it's like we hit fast forward on everything.
Totally. I mean, the pandemic, right? That threw a wrench in the works for sure. But it also like forced everyone to get up to speed with tech, like
Cool.
globally.
Uh-huh.
It was like, bam, overnight, remote work wasn't just this like perk for a few people. It was like the only option for everyone. So companies they had no choice but to really invest in those online tools, to actually make working from home work.
Oh, yeah, totally. And like, remember those first few months? It was like a crash course in doing everything online, like virtual conferences in your PJs, anyone.
Exactly. And it wasn't just work. Think about telemedicine. Like that went from this niche thing to like totally mainstream almost overnight. Yeah, for real. And that's led to some pretty crazy advancements, right? Like all that remote diagnosis stuff, people in like the middle of nowhere suddenly having access to doctors, all that.
Yeah.
The pandemic was rough, no doubt, but it definitely like pushed all this tech forward way faster.
For sure. I mean, it's like we got this sneak peek at what the future could look like, and now we're trying to figure out, like, okay, what parts of that do we want to keep?
Exactly. And speaking of sneak peeks, let's talk AI. It's everywhere, right? And it's both super cool and kind of scary all at the same time.
Yeah, AI is it's definitely becoming more and more present in our lives. Think about it. A few years back, self-driving cars were basically just this idea, and now you see them being tested like all over the place. And it's not just cars, it's healthcare, AI diagnosing stuff and finance, managing investments, even in like art and music.
Yeah, my music app, it's like it knows my taste better than I do sometimes,
Hmm.
which, impressive, sure, but also a little creepy. But on a serious note, with AI getting so smart so fast, what happens to jobs?
Ah, that's the big question, right? And honestly, nobody really knows for sure. Some people are
Yeah.
like, AI is going to create even more jobs than it takes away, but then others are worried about, mass unemployment and like needing things like universal basic income to make it work.
Right, right. It's a whole other deep dive we need to do for sure.
Definitely.
But okay, while we're on the topic of the future, we got to talk about the metaverse.
Huh.
It's like this buzzword everyone's using, but it's hard to tell what's real and what's like pure hype.
I mean, it's definitely more than just hype at this point. Basically, the metaverse is about creating these like really immersive digital experiences. So it's about blurring that line between the real world and the virtual world. And it uses things like VR and AR to come up with like new ways to work, learn, hang out, even shop, all that.
So like, are we talking like stepping into a video game? Because I'm not sure I'm ready to, live my whole life in a video game just yet.
Well, it's easy to think of it like gaming, yeah. But the metaverse has the potential to be so much bigger than that. Imagine like conferences where you actually feel like you're in the room with everyone, even if they're across the world.
Yeah.
Or like exploring some historical site without actually traveling.
Okay, now that does sound kind of cool. But what about like the downsides?
Yeah.
Digital addiction, privacy stuff, online harassment, all of that.
Yeah, those are all like totally valid concerns. And it just highlights how we need to approach the metaverse carefully. Think things through. Like with any new tech, there are going to be unintended consequences. So it's on us to make sure that like the metaverse is built in a way that's ethical, inclusive, and benefits, society as a whole.
It's like we're on the edge of this totally new territory, right? And we need to like watch our step. Speaking of new territory, let's talk about what's happening in medicine. It's like sci-fi stuff. Nanobots, bioprinting, gene editing.
Yeah, it's really an incredible time for medical innovation. Take nanotechnology, right? Like we're talking tiny robots that can deliver drugs, like directly to cancer cells or repair damaged tissues on a cellular level. And bioprinting is like letting us grow organs in the lab, which could, potentially solve the organ shortage crisis.
Organ printing. Okay, that's amazing, but also kind of freaks me out a little.
It's hard not to think about all the ethical questions this stuff brings up.
Oh, definitely. And there are some huge ethical questions to consider, like with gene editing, CRISPR and all that. It could cure genetic diseases, which is huge, but it also opens the door to like designer babies and all these other ethically tricky scenarios.
It's like we keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but we also need to have those tough conversations about like the ethical side of things. We don't want to get so caught up in the wow factor that we forget about like the potential consequences.
Totally agree. As tech keeps getting more advanced, so do our ethical frameworks and our ability to like really think critically about the long-term impacts of these innovations, for sure. And speaking of impact, we can't forget about like all the data that's being collected on us every single day. It feels like every website, every app I use is like tracking my every move.
I get it. Data privacy is a huge concern these days. Every click you make, every purchase, every social media post, it all generates data that's being collected, analyzed, and yeah, often used to make money.
Right. And it's not just about those targeted ads anymore. It's about surveillance, discrimination,
Right.
like the erosion of privacy on a scale we've never seen before.
You're hitting on something really important. The balance between convenience and privacy. It's getting trickier and trickier. As we embrace all this cool tech, we also got to be careful about protecting our data and demanding more transparency from the companies that are collecting it.
So we've got this incredible tech on one hand, but then these real concerns about privacy, ethics, the future of work, all that on the other. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is a lot. But I think what's important to remember is that we're not just along for the ride, you know? We have a choice in how we shape the future. We can choose to use tech for good, to promote equality, to solve problems, to make our lives better in ways that matter.
So it's not about predicting the future. It's about like creating the future we want. I love that. But okay, before we get too idealistic, let's zoom out for a second and look at what we've talked about so far. We've got the pandemic as this like catalyst for change, the rise of AI and how it'll affect jobs, the metaverse and all its potential, good and bad, those amazing medical advancements, and all the ethical dilemmas we're facing as tech evolves.
Exactly. We're living in a time of crazy change, driven by tech, but also by growing awareness of how connected everything is. But through all that change, there's one thing that stays the same: human ingenuity and our ability to adapt, innovate, and ultimately shape the future we want.
Okay, feeling a bit less overwhelmed, a bit more optimistic now, but where do we go from here? What trends, what developments can we expect to see in the next, say, 10 years?
Well, that's the question, right? Predicting the future is always a bit of a gamble, but I think if you look at the way things are going now, you can start to get a sense of what might be coming.
All right, so time to put on that futurist hat.
Yeah.
What's your crystal ball telling you? What's on the horizon?
Well, one thing's for sure, technology's not slowing down. If anything, it's speeding up. So we're going to see that line between the physical world and the digital world get even blurrier, like augmented reality, virtual reality. That's all going to be more and more a part of everyday life.
So like walking down the street and suddenly your glasses are showing you info about the shops around you or like historical landmarks and stuff, or like having a meeting where everyone feels like they're in the same room even though you're all miles apart.
Exactly. And that blend of physical and digital, it's going to change like everything: how we work, how we learn, even how we shop, how we experience our cities. We might even see those smart cities everyone's talking about, using sensors and AI to manage traffic, save energy, all that.
Okay, that sounds kind of amazing, but also a little, big brother-y. All that data floating around, how do we make sure it's being used responsibly, that our privacy is protected?
That's a huge question. And it shows how much we need strong ethical guidelines, regulations, all that around data. We're going to have to really wrestle with some tough stuff like who owns our data, how can it be used, how do we make sure these technologies benefit everyone, not just a few.
Right, right. It's like we're going into this uncharted territory. Got to make sure we pack our moral compass along with our tech gadgets. But, okay, beyond the ethics, what about the actual cool stuff, the innovations? What's going to blow our minds in the next 10 years?
Well, for one, think about AI in healthcare. We're already seeing AI diagnose diseases, personalize treatments, even develop drugs. But in the next decade, that's just going to explode. Imagine AI that can predict your risk of getting certain diseases years in advance or create, custom fitness plans based on your DNA.
Okay, now that's getting into, sci-fi territory. But beyond healthcare, where else is AI going to make a splash?
Well, education's ripe for a shakeup. Imagine AI tutors that can adapt to how each student learns best, give personalized instruction, feedback. That could totally change how we learn, make education more accessible, more effective for everyone.
That's like having a personal tutor 24/7.
Yeah.
But what happens to teachers in all of this?
Great question. I don't think AI will ever replace teachers completely, but it can definitely help them out, free them up to focus on the things humans do best, like fostering creativity, critical thinking, social skills, all that.
Right, so it's about finding that balance, the power of AI, but still with that human touch. And speaking of human touch, what about work? We talked about AI maybe taking jobs, but what about the jobs it might create?
That's a really interesting thing to think about. As AI gets smarter, it's going to create whole new industries, job categories we can't even imagine yet. Like maybe a huge need for AI ethicists, data privacy specialists, even virtual world designers.
Virtual world designers. Wait, so you're saying my love of video games could actually be a career in the future?
It's definitely possible. As the metaverse grows, they're going to need people who can create those immersive digital experiences. All those skills from game design, storytelling, world building.